Welcome to Mysteries Beneath Earth, and thank you for joining this quiet exploration. And in that great, long memory, the silence we hear right now might just be a pause, a simple breath taken between one story and the next. For this new story, let us travel from the abyss of deep time to the abyss of deep water. Let us drift away from the ancient, dry stone of the continents and float, in our minds, to a different kind of archive. A place that is cold, dark, and holds its secrets not for eons, but for centuries, preserving the tragedies and mysteries of our own, more recent human past. We are going to the Baltic Sea. It is not, by the standards of the world's great oceans, a particularly deep sea. It is relatively shallow, an inland sea, brackish and cold. But it is a sea of memory. Its dark, cold, and low salinity water is a unique preservative. It is a graveyard of stories. Thousands upon thousands of shipwrecks, from Viking longships to 17th century warships and 20th century submarines, lie on its floor, many in a state of breathtaking preservation, their masts still standing, their wooden hulls almost untouched by the creatures that would devour them in warmer, saltier waters. The floor of the Baltic is a museum, lying in silent darkness. It is a place where explorers go not to find geological wonders, but to find lost history, frozen in time. And it was in the summer of 2011 that a small commercial team of Swedish ocean explorers, the Ocean X team, was doing just that. They were not searching for anomalies. They were not looking for the ancient past. They were, quite simply, treasure hunters, using their sophisticated side-scan sonar to sweep the dark floor of the Bothnian Sea, the vast stretch of water between Sweden and Finland, searching for the lost cargo of forgotten ships. Their method was routine. Their boat, the Anomaly, would travel in long, precise lines, towing its sonar fish behind it, patiently painting a picture of the abyss below, line by line. The sonar sends out a pulse of sound, a ping, and then listens for the echo, measuring the time it takes to return, translating that echo into an image of the seafloor. It is a way of seeing with sound. For days, the images were as expected. Long, flat plains of mud and clay, the occasional ridge of rock, the scattered debris of the modern world. And then, the sonar painted a picture that made no sense. At 90 meters down, almost 300 feet below the waves, a shape appeared on their screens that did not belong. It was not a shipwreck. It was not a random pile of rocks. It was a massive, perfectly and impossibly circular object. It was, in their own words, a colossal mushroom shape, a huge, rounded disc 60 meters wide, nearly 200 feet across, the size of a jumbo jet. It seemed to be made of stone, but it was a shape that geology does not, as a rule, produce. It was a perfect circle. More than that, the object itself seemed to be raised slightly off the seafloor, sitting atop a pillar or structure, and it had features. The sonar images suggested geometric precision. Smooth, rounded edges and lines that looked artificial. Most famously, there appeared to be a long, flat track or runway stretching out from the anomaly for nearly 300 meters, as if this thing had skidded to a halt on the muddy bottom. The sonar image was grainy. It was a picture made of sound, ambiguous and strange, but it was undeniably there, and it was undeniably circular. It looked, as the world's media would soon latch onto, like a spaceship. Specifically, it bore an uncanny resemblance to the Millennium Falcon from science fiction. The team, baffled, marked the coordinates. This was not the shipwreck they were looking for. This was something else. The initial discovery was fascinating, But it was what happened next that would elevate this from a simple curiosity into one of the modern world's most compelling mysteries. The real story began when they tried to get a closer look. The electronic interference. The Ocean X team are professional divers and explorers. They are accustomed to the difficulties of the deep sea. But they were not prepared for what happened when they maneuvered their ship directly above the anomaly. As they passed over the spot 90 meters above the silent object, their equipment began to fail. Not just one piece of equipment, but all of it. Their satellite phones died. Their high-tech cameras glitched and refused to function. Even simple, non-satellite-based electronics on the boat began to flicker and fail. The team's captain, Peter Lindbergh, reported that the interference was total. He had never seen anything like it. And then, as they moved their boat just a few hundred meters away from the coordinates, the equipment flickered back to life. The satellite phones reconnected. The cameras rebooted. They sailed back over the spot. And again, a circle of interference, roughly 200 meters wide, seemed to radiate from the object below, creating a dead zone on the surface. They tested it again and again, and the effect was consistent. It was as if the object was emitting some kind of energy field or absorbing signals, creating an electronic shadow in the water above it. This was no longer just a strange shape. This was an active anomaly. The mystery deepened. What was this thing? The team's own geologist, Steve Weiner, examined the sonar data and was baffled. He stated that the structure was not a natural geological formation. He noted that the smooth, curved lines, the straight edges, and the staircase-like features visible in the sonar imagery were not characteristic of any known glacial deposit or volcanic rock. Geologically, it made no sense. And then there were the sonar readings themselves. Beyond the shape, the object behaved strangely. The team reported that the sonar signal itself seemed to behave erratically near it. It wasn't just reflecting a shape. It was as if the object itself was different. Some reports suggested the sonar signals were being absorbed, or that the object's material was something so dense or so strange that the sonar could not properly resolve it. It was a dead zone, not just for their electronics, but for the acoustic site they were using to see it. Here, then, was the puzzle. 90 meters down, in the cold, preserving silence of the Baltic Sea, sat a colossal, perfectly circular disk. It was discovered by seasoned explorers. It appeared on sonar to have geometric, artificial-looking features. It emitted or created an interference field that shut down all electronics that passed directly over it. And it was made of a substance or had a property that baffled their geologist and their sonar equipment. The question, floating in the dark on that ship, was the same one that would soon captivate the world. What is it? The location itself is part of the mystery. The Baltic Sea is a busy waterway, but it is also a place of military history. The seafloor is littered not just with ancient wrecks, but with the debris of 2 world wars. There are anti-submarine nets, concrete structures, and the unexploded ordnance of a century of conflict. Could it be one of these? A top-secret, forgotten military installation? Perhaps a concrete base for a German anti-submarine net, as some skeptics proposed. This would explain a large, circular structure, but it would not explain the size. 60 meters is enormous. And it would certainly not explain the bizarre, total electronic interference. Those 2 facts, the perfect circle and the electronic failure, were the 2 pillars of the mystery. They are what prevented this from being dismissed as just another rock. The team and the world was left to speculate. The theories naturally began to fly. The most sensational, And the one that captured the public imagination was that it was exactly what it looked like: a crashed extraterrestrial object, a sunken UFO lying dormant on the seafloor for thousands of years, its systems perhaps still faintly active, emitting the energy field that disrupted their equipment. It was a fantasy, a piece of science fiction, but it was a fantasy that inconveniently seemed to fit the strange data they had collected. Other theories were more grounded, yet still profound. Was it a relic of a lost, ancient human civilization? A Baltic Atlantis, a structure built during the last ice age, when the sea level of the Baltic was much lower, perhaps a great stone temple or monument, now drowned by the rising waters? This too was a possibility. It would explain the stone-like appearance, but not the perfect geometry or the interference. The object sits there now as we speak, in that cold, silent dark. It has been visited since, though the dives have been difficult, visibility is near zero, and the mystery has only deepened. Samples taken from it have been analyzed, but the results, like the object itself, have been confusing and contradictory. It is a puzzle made of stone, or metal, or something else entirely, wrapped in the cold, dark water of a sea that knows how to keep its secrets. And it leaves us, as we drift and think, with that same simple, unsettling question that the explorers had on their boat in 2011, as they watched their equipment die in the darkness. What is it? We are left to wonder, to sift through the possibilities, from the mundane to the extraordinary, suspended between the rational and the romantic. And that is where our exploration of it must begin. And that is where our exploration of it must begin. The sonar image, for all its mystery, was just a ghost, a picture made of sound, tantalizing and blurry. It was not proof of anything, only a profound and compelling invitation. The team, OceanX, now had a set of coordinates, a strange sonar profile, and a disturbing story about electronic failures. They had a mystery that was impossible to leave alone, resting in the dark, 90 meters down. And so, in 2012, they returned. This time, they came prepared not just to see with sound, but to look with cameras and to touch with human hands. They assembled a team of divers, including the co-founders, Peter Lindbergh and Dennis Asberg, and prepared to descend. 90 meters is not a casual dive. At that depth, the world is one of crushing pressure, absolute cold, and a darkness that no sunlight has ever touched. It is a hostile, alien environment. The divers would be breathing a special mix of gases, their time on the bottom strictly limited, the ascent slow and methodical to avoid the fatal consequences of decompression. The object was waiting. The divers began their descent, falling away from the sunlit, noisy surface, down into the silent, green-black water of the Baltic. The visibility, as is common in the Baltic, was terrible. They were descending into a cold, dark soup. Their powerful lights could only penetrate a few meters, illuminating a swirling cloud of silt and marine snow. And then, out of that murky void, something vast loomed. The first impression was not of a ship or a rock. It was simply scale. It was enormous, a dark mass rising from the seafloor. As they got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was the mushroom or dome that the sonar had promised. It was a massive, rounded object, a great circular dome of stone-like material. It was not, they reported, a smooth, perfect dome. It was rugged, cracked, and covered in a dark, fine layer of silt that, when disturbed, clouded their vision completely. It was, they said, like a concrete structure, and it had features. The reports from the divers were fragmented, confused, but compelling. They described a structure that did not feel natural. They found what appeared to be a staircase, a set of geometric 90-degree angle steps leading up one side of the dome. A staircase in the middle of the Baltic Sea floor on an object that should not be there. They found perfectly straight, long cracks and fissures in the object's surface, separating it into sections, their edges looking sharp and unnatural, as if cut or formed. The entire object, they reported, seemed to be covered in a strange, black, soot-like material, as if it had been burned. They had never seen a natural rock formation that looked or felt like this. They swam across its vast, curved surface. They found a strange, perfectly circular hole, about 25 centimeters across, that went directly into the anomaly. They could not see how deep it went. They also found, nearby what looked like a grill or a grate, a series of parallel lines etched into the surface. The entire experience was disorienting. They were trying to make sense of a structure the size of a jumbo jet, with visibility of only a meter or two in the crushing cold and dark. They were feeling it, more than seeing it, piecing it together in their minds. But the most important part of their mission was to bring a piece of it back. They chipped off several samples from the anomaly's surface. The material was hard like stone, but the divers reported it felt strange. It was a dark, almost black rock. They bagged these fragments, the first tangible pieces of the mystery, and began their slow, careful ascent back to the world of air and light, leaving the silent dome to its darkness. But the seafloor was not done with its surprises. On that same expedition, while maneuvering their remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, and analyzing the sonar, they found a second anomaly. About 200 meters away from the main circular object, the sonar painted another strange picture. This one was not a dome. It was a long, raised ridge of stone with a sharp, pointed, Gothic window or canyon shape, a jagged fissure down its center. This second anomaly in itself was a geological curiosity, but it was its relationship to the main object that was truly baffling. The two objects, the dome and the canyon, seemed to be connected. The long, flat runway or track that they had seen in the original 2011 sonar data now made more sense. It was a path of disturbed seafloor, a great wide scar in the mud that seemed to lead directly from the dome to the canyon. The implication was staggering. It looked as if the dome had moved, that it had skidded across the seafloor, creating this 300-meter-long track before coming to rest in its current position. And the canyon? It looked like the other half of the track, the skid mark left by a second object that had split off. Or perhaps the dome had been towed or dragged from that spot. The entire scene suggested a dynamic event. This was not a structure that had simply sat there for millennia. This was the scene of a crash, or a landing, or some other violent, unexplained event. The team now had more questions than ever. They had two strange anomalies, seemingly connected by a track, and they had the mysterious electronic interference. And now they had the samples. The world waited. What was this rock? The fragments were sent for analysis, and the results, when they came back, threw the entire mystery into a new and even more confusing light. The first analyses, conducted by a geologist named Steve Weiner, were startling. He claimed the material was not, in his view, a simple, natural geological rock. It was, he said, a metal or a metallic alloy. He reported finding traces of iron, but also other elements in concentrations that did not make sense. He famously compared it to slag, the industrial byproduct of high-temperature metal smelting. This, of course, ignited a firestorm of speculation. Slag? an industrial byproduct the size of a jet sitting on the seafloor? But other later analyses were more sober. A team from Stockholm University examined a sample and concluded it was just rock. Specifically, they identified common minerals like quartz and then limonite and goethite, which are forms of iron oxide, rust, essentially. They suggested the object was a post-glacial deposit, a rock dropped by a melting iceberg at the end of the last ice age, its strange shape carved by the water. This was the simple, scientific, rational explanation. And it would have been the end of the story, except it wasn't, because this simple, rational explanation failed to account for the two most profound and most reported facts of the case: the perfectly circular geometric shape and the powerful, consistent electronic interference. Glacial deposits are not perfectly round. They do not have staircases, and rocks do not, as a rule, shut down satellite phones. The scientific explanation felt incomplete, as unsatisfying as the crashed UFO theory. It explained the material, but it did not explain the object. The team was split. The public was confused. The samples themselves were contradictory. The mystery, far from being solved, had simply become deeper, colder, and darker. The mystery, far from being solved, had simply become deeper, colder, and darker. It now existed in two separate worlds. In one world, the world of sober scientific analysis in a university lab, it was a simple rock, a lump of iron oxide, a glacial erratic, a mundane piece of stone dropped by a melting glacier 10,000 years ago, and the case was closed. But in the other world, the world of the on-site explorers, the divers, and the ship's captains, it was something else entirely. It was a perfectly circular, 60-meter-wide object that shut down their electronics, an object that had staircases, geometric lines, and a runway that suggested a violent crash. These two descriptions could not both be true. And this is the enduring heart of the Baltic Sea anomaly. The mystery is not in the object itself. It is in the disconnect between what the object is said to be and what it is reported to do. Let us drift for a moment with the scientific explanation. Let us assume the sample from Stockholm University is the final word. It is a rock, a simple post-glacial deposit. This is the argument of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. The Baltic seafloor is littered with billions of rocks of all natural origins. The chances of this one being natural are, statistically, overwhelming. But if it is just a rock, how do we account for the data that made it famous? Let us begin with the strongest, most inexplicable piece of evidence: the electronic interference. The team's report was specific: a 200-meter bubble extending to the surface 90 meters above. Satellite phones died. Cameras failed. This is not a property of a rock. So what could it be? The skeptics quite rightly point to other possibilities. Firstly, human error. Could the boat's own electrical systems have been faulty? Perhaps a bad ground wire on their sonar equipment created a feedback loop that interfered with other devices. This is plausible. Yet, the team insists the effect was consistent, repeatable, and tied only to the specific coordinates of the anomaly. It stopped the moment they moved away and started again the moment they returned. This suggests the source was external, not internal. A more compelling scientific explanation is that the object is a rock, but a very special one. A massive, highly concentrated deposit of iron. A giant lump of natural iron or a large enough magnetic mass could, in theory, interfere with sensitive electronics. The Earth has many such magnetic anomalies. This explanation is scientific, grounded, and feels rational. And yet, it too has problems. A natural iron deposit would not be a perfect, smooth 60-meter circle. It would be a messy, irregular lump the way nature forms things. And while it might affect a compass, it is highly debatable whether it would have the power to consistently knock out modern, shielded satellite phones 90 meters above it. The effect they described was just too strong, too precise. The interference remains the most powerful and unexplained pillar of the mystery. But what of the other pillar? The visual evidence, the staircase, the right angles, the geometric lines the divers reported seeing. Surely this is proof of artificial design. Here, the skeptical argument is perhaps at its strongest. We must remember the conditions of the dive. 90 meters down, absolute darkness, near zero visibility, a swirling cloud of silt. The divers were not calmly observing an object in a well-lit room. They were in a disorienting, high-stress, alien environment, their vision limited to the few feet illuminated by their headlamps. The human brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It is designed to find order in chaos. In the dark, in the silt, could a simple, rectangular, natural basaltic crack in a rock look like a staircase? Absolutely. Could a natural fissure feel like a cut line? Yes. The divers' reports, while given in good faith, are subjective. They are human perceptions, filtered through the distorting lens of an extreme environment. The soot-like material they found? The university analysis explained this: limonite and guthite, simple iron oxides. In other words, rust. The black soot was likely just a dark, fine-grained layer of rust and sediment, common on any iron-rich rock in the sea. Suddenly, the burnt appearance has a mundane and very plausible explanation. This is the great tug-of-war at the heart of this story. For every piece of extraordinary evidence, there is a mundane explanation, and for every mundane explanation, there is a piece of data that it just doesn't quite fit. The mystery lives in the gaps, in the what-ifs. We must also gently, and without judgment, consider the explorers themselves. The Ocean X team is a professional, commercial salvage and treasure hunting operation. Their business relies on expeditions, and expeditions require funding. And funding in the modern world relies on publicity. A mystery is simply good for business. This does not mean they faked anything. It does not mean they are lying. It simply provides context. They benefit from the story remaining a mystery. A headline that reads "Scientists Find Strange Rock" does not generate funding. A headline that reads "Crashed UFO Baffles Scientists" does. This psychological context is as much a part of the anomaly as the rock itself. But even if we dismiss the diver's subjective staircase as a trick of the dark, and even if we are cynical about the team's motives, we are still left with two core machine-recorded facts. First, the original 2011 side-scan sonar image. It is a perfect circle. It is 60 meters wide. It does have a 300-meter skid mark leading to it. That image, while grainy, is real. And second, the electronic interference. That too was a repeatable, machine-verified event. The "it's just a rock" theory, while scientifically clean, fails to address why this one rock, out of all the rocks in the sea, has this perfect shape and this strange active property. And so, the object rests in a liminal space. It is a place between the known and the unknown. It is too strange to be natural, yet too mundane to be alien. It is a geological curiosity, and it is a psychological phenomenon. It is a perfect story, a Rorschach test projected onto the dark floor of the sea. What you see in it says perhaps as much about you as it does about the object. And it is still there, waiting, while the world debates what it is. It sits in the cold, preserving dark, keeping its own counsel, a perfect, silent circle of stone, or metal, or something else entirely. The object itself does not care what we call it. Simply is. And the questions it raises are, perhaps, more valuable than any simple answer could ever be. And the questions it raises are, perhaps, more valuable than any simple answer could ever be. Because the object is still there. The expeditions, for the most part, have stopped. The cost of mounting a full-scale, deep-sea scientific excavation, one that could truly answer the question, is astronomical. And no university or government is willing to spend that kind of money to investigate what their own labs have already concluded is, most likely, just a very interesting rock. And so the mystery has, in a way, been won by the mundane. It has been filed away not as solved, but as not interesting enough to solve. It has sunk, once again, back into the darkness, becoming what it was in 2011. A grainy sonar image, a strange story told by sailors. And it is in this quiet, informational vacuum, in this stalemate, that the imagination is free to drift. It is here, in the absence of hard data, that the other theories continue to live, breathing in the darkness. Let us, for a moment, gently follow them, not as proponents, but as quiet observers. The most spectacular, of course, is the extraterrestrial one, the crashed UFO. It is the theory that the media loved, the one that the object's shape, the Millennium Falcon, so perfectly suggests. In this story, the 300-meter skid mark is exactly that, the scar of a desperate, uncontrolled landing millions or perhaps just thousands of years ago. The object is a ship, not of stone, but of some unknown, ancient technology, now covered in millennia of silt. And the electronic interference? That, in this version, is the most compelling evidence of all. It is the faint, dying whisper of its power core, or a damaged system, still emitting a field that our modern, primitive electronics cannot handle. It is a romantic and wonderful thought. It is, however, a leap of extraordinary proportions, and there is not one shred of evidence beyond the suggestive shape to support it. But there is another theory, one we have touched upon before, the ancient civilization, the Baltic Atlantis. This theory suggests the object is not alien but ancient human. Points to the end of the last ice age around 12,000 years ago. At that time, the Baltic Sea was not a sea at all. It was a vast, freshwater glacial lake, and the water levels were significantly lower. The place where the Anomaly now rests 90 meters down might once have been dry, or at least in a shallow, accessible basin. Could a forgotten prehistoric culture have built a great circular monument there? A stone temple, a ritual site, a northern Stonehenge? This would explain the staircase, the geometric lines, and the stone-like material. It would be a discovery on par with Göbekli Tepe, a window into a part of human history we never knew existed. But this theory, too, stumbles on the same inconvenient facts. A stone structure would not and could not produce that powerful electronic interference. And the skid mark implies movement, which a building, as a rule, does not do. So this, too, feels incomplete. And this leads us to a third path, one that is not ancient, not alien, but is, in many ways, the most mysterious of all. A theory that is grounded, modern, and chilling. What if the object is ours? A human artifact, but one that was never meant to be found. The Baltic Sea, we must remember, is not just a sea of ancient wrecks. It is, perhaps more than any other body of water on Earth, a sea of war. It was a primary theater for 2 world wars and the shadowy, silent front line of the entire Cold War. Its floor is a museum not just of galleons, but of submarines, mines, secret listening devices, and the wreckage of countless forgotten military experiments. The waters between Sweden and Finland, where the Anomaly lies, were one of the most strategically sensitive areas on the planet. This is not just a place of history, it is a place of secrets. And in this context, the object begins to look different. What if it is a lost secret weapon? This is a very popular theory. During World War II, the Germans built massive, circular concrete structures on the seafloor, anti-submarine nets or foundations designed to snag or detect Allied submarines. Could this be one of them? The size is immense, but perhaps not impossible. It would be concrete, which would match the divers' stone-like descriptions. But again, the interference. A lump of concrete does not shut down satellite phones, and it would not have been dragged 300 meters. But the Cold War, that is a different matter. What if the object is a top-secret Cold War-era surveillance device? A massive, magnetic loop array placed on the seafloor by one side to detect the metallic hulls of enemy submarines passing over it? Such a device would be electronic. It would be massive. It would be circular to create a specific detection field. And it would, quite possibly, be designed to emit a powerful electronic or magnetic pulse, one that could very well interfere with modern sonar and satellite equipment. This theory is compelling. It explains the 2 most difficult pieces of the puzzle: the geometry and the interference. It also explains why no government or university is eager to investigate it. If it is a classified military device, perhaps Soviet, perhaps NATO, it would still be a sensitive secret. No one would want to poke it. It would be a secret that everyone has agreed to let lie. This theory feels solid, logical, and grounded in the known, secret history of the region. And yet, it too stumbles. The divers' samples were analyzed as rock, limonite, goethite, not the high-tech components of a military array. And then there is the skid mark and the second anomaly. It doesn't look like a device that was placed. It looks like the site of a crash. So even this, the most rational of the extraordinary theories, does not fit perfectly. And this is where we are left, floating in the dark, suspended between all these possibilities. The object, in its profound silence, refuses to conform. It is not a perfect rock. It is not a perfect spaceship. It is not a perfect ancient temple. And it is not a perfect military device. It is a little bit of all of them, and not enough of any of them. It is the ultimate anomaly. It is a piece of the world that has resisted categorization, a piece of data that does not fit the database. It is a quiet, 200-foot wide question mark, painted in sound, resting on the floor of a sea of secrets, inviting us to wonder and forcing us, in the end, to accept that some things, in this vast, modern, and brightly lit world, still lie in the dark and perhaps are meant to. And this is where we are left, floating in the dark, suspended between all these possibilities. The object, in its profound silence, refuses to conform. It is not a perfect rock. It is not a perfect spaceship. It is not a perfect ancient temple. And it is not a perfect military device. It is a little bit of all of them and not enough of any of them. It is the ultimate anomaly. It is a piece of the world that has resisted categorization, a piece of data that does not fit the database. It is a quiet, 200-foot wide question mark, painted in sound, resting on the floor of a sea of secrets, inviting us to wonder and forcing us, in the end, to accept that some things in this vast, modern, and brightly lit world still lie in the dark and perhaps are meant to. This in itself is a function that mysteries serve. In an age where satellites have mapped nearly every square inch of our land, where our phones can answer any factual question in an instant, we feel at times that the world is solved, that all the dragons have been slain and all the blank spots on the map have been filled in. A mystery like the Baltic Sea anomaly does something essential. Tears a small hole in that map. It reminds us that we are still surface dwellers, floating on a thin skin of water, and that the depths beneath us, whether in the ocean or in the rock, are still vast, alien, and capable of holding secrets. The anomaly is not just an object. It is a blank spot that we discovered in our own, familiar, modern backyard. And this, perhaps, is why we are so drawn to it. It is a portal not to another world, but to a feeling, the feeling of true, uncharted exploration, a feeling that is becoming increasingly rare. But let us, for a moment, try one last time to pull the mystery back to the shore of the mundane. Let us consider the possibility of combination. We, as humans, are storytellers. We love to connect the dots. We found a strange shape, and on the same day, we experienced a strange electronic failure. Our minds immediately welded these two events together. The shape caused the failure. But what if this is our fundamental error? What if they were two separate, unrelated events that just happened to occur at the same time and place? Let us imagine this. Event 1. The team's sonar finds a strange, perfectly circular, natural rock formation. Is this possible? Yes. Nature does, on rare occasions, create geometry. Volcanic pillow lava can form large, rounded domes. More commonly, a mud volcano or a pingo, a gas or fluid seep from the seafloor, can push up sediment, and as the minerals precipitate, they can form a hard, circular cap over the vent. This is a known, natural, geological process. It would create a large, circular, stone-like dome. It would be a glacial deposit of a special, but entirely natural kind. This would satisfy the university analysis, just rock, and the sonar shape, a perfect circle. This leaves event 2, the electronic failure. In this scenario, it had nothing to do with the rock below. It was, as skeptics suggested, a simple, mundane technical glitch on the boat. A bad power converter, a short in the sonar's wiring, a software bug. It happened by pure statistical chance at the exact moment they were sailing over their most interesting discovery. The team naturally linked the two. A story was born. This coincidence theory is, in many ways, the most rational and scientifically sound explanation of all. It is also the most unsatisfying. It dismantles the entire mystery. It leaves us with just a rock and a glitch. It feels perhaps too simple. It does not feel as grand as the object itself. And it still struggles with that 300-meter skid mark. Mud volcanoes do not, as a rule, skid. And so the mystery persists. The object itself has become a cultural phenomenon, a modern legend. It is a story that is told and retold, each time, the details shifting, the sonar image becoming a little clearer in our minds, the staircase a little more defined, the UFO comparison a little more certain. The story of the anomaly has become more real and more powerful than the object itself. The object is just a cold, dark, ambiguous lump, 90 meters down. But the idea of the object that is a living, breathing thing. It is a testament to our own need for mystery, our desire to find the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. It is the same impulse that makes us see faces in the clouds or find meaning in the stars. We want the world to be more than just what it seems. And the Baltic Sea anomaly is the perfect screen onto which we can project that desire. It has been years now since the main expeditions. The Ocean X team has moved on to other wrecks, other searches. The scientific community has filed its report and closed the book. The world's media has found new, more immediate things to talk about. The anomaly, it seems, has been left to its silence. It is returning to what it was before 2011, a secret kept by the sea. And this is, perhaps, the most fitting place for it to be. The Baltic Sea, as we have said, is a graveyard of stories. It holds more wrecks per square mile than almost any other place on Earth. It is a dark, cold, liquid archive. The anomaly is now one of those stories. It is a modern wreck, not of a ship, but of a question. A question that crashed against the hard wall of scientific skepticism and the high cost of exploration and sank. It is now part of the local lore, a ghost story whispered among divers. And it will wait there in the dark, along with the Viking ships and the warships and the lost submarines. It will wait for a time, perhaps, when a new technology, a new explorer, or a new curiosity makes it possible to return, to lift the veil of silt and darkness, and to finally truly know. But until that day, it remains in that perfect liminal space, that bedtime space, no longer a hard fact, but not just a fantasy. It is a true mystery, a dark, circular mirror at the bottom of the sea, reflecting our own wonder, our own fears, and our own unending desire to look into the dark and find that we are not alone. And in that unending desire to find that we are not alone, we often look to the most extreme places, to the distant stars, or the deep geological past. But sometimes the most profound mysteries are not millions of years old. They are mere centuries old, submerged in the waters of our own, more recent human story. To truly understand the Baltic anomaly, to feel its context, we must first understand the unique and ghostly sea that holds it. We must drift, for a moment, not with the anomaly itself, but with the dark, cold water that surrounds it. The Baltic Sea is not like other seas. It is not the warm, vibrant, life-filled Mediterranean. It is not the vast, crushing, salty expanse of the Atlantic. The Baltic is a different kind of entity. It is an inland sea, almost a great lake, fed by over 200 rivers and connected to the open ocean by only a few narrow, shallow straits. This means its water is brackish, a cold, low-salt mixture of fresh river water and intruding ocean water. And this one fact, this lack of salt, combined with its extreme cold and low oxygen levels in its depths, makes the Baltic Sea a place of impossible preservation. It is a perfect, liquid time capsule. In the warmer, salter oceans of the world, when a wooden ship sinks, it is immediately set upon by a microscopic army of devourers, chief among them a tiny, voracious mollusk called the Teredo or the shipworm. This creature, which is not a worm at all, bores into any submerged wood, riddling it, consuming it, and returning it to the ecosystem. A wooden wreck in the Caribbean might be reduced to a pile of ballast stones and cannons within a century. But the shipworm cannot survive in the low-salt, cold water of the Baltic. It is, in effect, a sea without the creature that eats history. And so, the Baltic floor has become a silent, crowded, and perfectly preserved museum of human conflict and commerce. There are, it is estimated, over 100,000 wrecks on its floor. Not just piles of debris, but ships, Viking longships from 1,000 years ago, their dragon prows still intact. Great 17th century warships like the Swedish galleon Vasa, which sank in 1628 and was raised almost completely intact 3 centuries later, it was so perfectly preserved that it is now a national treasure. The Vasa is the Anomaly's most famous cousin. Proved what the Baltic could do. Deeper, on the dark floor, lie even more ghosts. There is the Mars, a legendary Swedish warship that exploded and sank in 1564, found sitting upright, its hull split open like a skull, a terrifying monument of a forgotten war. There are the ghost ships, Dutch flights from the 1600s, found in recent years by diving teams, their masts still standing, their rigging still draped, their hulls full of cargo, as if they were simply sailing on the seafloor, waiting for a crew that has been gone for 400 years. This is the water that holds the Anomaly. It is a sea where the past does not rot. It does not decay, simply waits. When the Ocean X team sailed over that patch of sea, they were sailing over a known graveyard. They were treasure hunters looking for another one of these preserved ghosts, another ship full of valuable cargo, frozen in time. And this context makes the Anomaly itself even more strange. If it is an artificial object, a crashed ship, or a lost structure, the Baltic is the one place on Earth where it would be perfectly preserved. The silt and the rust-like soot, the iron oxides, that the divers found are exactly what we would expect to see coating any object, natural or artificial, that has been lying in that environment. The just rock theory is simple, but in a sea of perfectly preserved ships, it almost feels less likely. The Baltic floor is not a random, chaotic geological place. It is an archive. It is a library where the books have not been burned by time. And so, the Anomaly sits there, in this cold, dark, archival silence, alongside these other known mysteries. It is the strangest object in a sea of strange objects. It is the one shipwreck that makes no sense, the one item in the museum that has no label, no date, and no known origin. The cold, preserving water of the Baltic does not just protect the object. It protects the mystery. It is the perfect guardian. Its near-zero visibility, its bone-chilling cold, its crushing depth. These are the walls and the security guards of this strange museum. They are what have kept the mystery alive. They are what made the divers' reports so fragmented, so confused. They are what have made a full-scale excavation prohibitively expensive and dangerous. The sea itself is an accomplice to the secret, and so we must see the Anomaly not as an isolated thing, but as the king of this ghost fleet. It is the ultimate cold case, lying in a jurisdiction that is famous for them. This context does not solve the riddle, but it deepens it. It wraps it in a richer, colder, and more tangible darkness. We are no longer just imagining a shape from a sonar scan. We are now placing it on a real seafloor, a place we know holds wonders. We can now, in our minds, drift over that dark, muddy bottom, past the upright mast of a 17th century merchant ship, past the dark, silent hull of a World War II submarine, and then, looming out of the swirling silt, we see it. The vast, dark, impossible circle. The Anomaly. It is the one story in this sea of stories that we cannot read. The one ghost that does not speak our name or come from our known history. It is the true, dark, silent heart of the Baltic's long, cold memory. It is the true, dark, silent heart of the Baltic's long, cold memory. And yet, this mystery is a story in 2 parts. The first part is the object itself, the cold, silent thing in the dark. The second part, and perhaps the more powerful, is the human mind that observed it. The Anomaly is not just a geological or technological puzzle. It is a profound psychological one. It is a story about the act of seeing and the unstoppable human need to find order in the void. We are not passive cameras. We are not simple, rational recording devices. The human brain is an engine of meaning. It is a pattern-seeking machine that has evolved over millions of years to do one thing very, very well: to find a signal in the noise. It is a survival mechanism. The ancestor who saw a faint, curved line in the tall grass and interpreted it as a snake survived. The one who dismissed it as just a line did not. The one who saw a faint, symmetrical arrangement of shadows in the dark and interpreted it as a face, a predator or a rival, was prepared. The one who saw only shadows was not. We are the descendants of the pattern seers. We are hardwired to find faces in the clouds, figures in the static, and messages in the random fall of leaves. Scientists have a name for this: pareidolia. It is the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a vague or random stimulus. It is why we see a man in the moon or a face on the surface of Mars. It is a quirk, a ghost in our own cognitive machinery. And the Baltic Sea anomaly is perhaps the most perfect example of pareidolia in the modern world. Let us go back to that first crucial piece of evidence: the 2011 side-scan sonar image. It is a grainy, low-resolution picture made of sound. It is not a photograph. It is an acoustic shadow, a blob on a screen, and yet it is compellingly circular. It does look like the Millennium Falcon. It is the perfect stimulus. It is just vague enough to allow for imagination, but just defined enough to suggest a pattern. That single image released to the media was the seed. The human imagination did the rest. It was a Rorschach test for the entire planet. What did you see? A rock or a ship? And this is where the human element, the storytellers, become as important as the divers. The Ocean X team, in naming their own discovery, were not neutral observers. They are, as we have noted, treasure hunters, storytellers, and media-savvy explorers. Their public descriptions, a perfect circle, a jumbo jet, were not sterile scientific terms. They were evocative, emotional, and visual. They guided our perception. They handed us the pattern. And then there are the divers' own reports. The staircase, the right angles, the circular hole, and the grill. As we explored, these were observations made in the most extreme, disorienting conditions imaginable. 90 meters down, crushing pressure, zero visibility, swirling silt. Their minds, their highly trained professional minds, were desperate to make sense of the chaos, to build a mental map from the fragments of tactile and visual information they were getting. In that swirling, dark soup, a series of natural, rectangular basaltic cracks becomes a staircase. A simple, linear fracture in the rock becomes a cut line. The brain, in its need for order, creates the geometry. This is not a criticism of the divers. It is a fundamental truth of human perception. They were not just seeing an object. They were interpreting it in real time under conditions that are almost designed to create illusions. And so, the anomaly was built not just of rock or metal, but of data and of story. The two became inextricably linked. The staircase narrative, once told, cemented the artificial nature of the object in the public mind. The electronic interference, reported by the team, became the story's supernatural element, its curse. It confirmed that the object was not just shaped like a machine, but that it acted like one. It was a story that was simply too good not to be true. And we, the public, the listeners, the watchers, were eager to believe. We live in a world that, as we have said, often feels solved. We crave the unknown. We want there to be a sunken spaceship, a lost Atlantis, a secret military device. We want the dragons to be real, a mundane explanation, a lump of iron oxide dropped by a glacier, and a coincidental electrical fault on a boat is deeply, profoundly unsatisfying. It feels like an anticlimax. It robs us of the wonder, and so the mystery itself becomes a kind of refuge, a place where the imagination can be free, where the what if is more important and more comforting than the what is. This is the psychological power of the Baltic Sea anomaly. It is a perfectly balanced mystery. It gives us just enough objective, machine-recorded data, the sonar circle, the interference reports, to make it real, and just enough subjective, human-reported data, the staircase, the shapes, to make it intelligent. It is a riddle that, because it remains unsolved, can be whatever we need it to be. It is a rock. It is a ship. It is a temple. It is a secret. It is all of them and none of them. It is a story that we are telling ourselves about ourselves. It is a story about our relationship with the unknown. And so, as we drift and think, we must acknowledge this dual nature, the object in the dark and the mind that is looking at it, the cold, hard, physical thing and the warm, vibrant, living idea of the thing. Both are real. Both are part of the phenomenon. And this human element, this storytelling part, is not a contamination of the mystery. It is the mystery. It is the most human part of the journey. It is our own collective whispered response to the cold, silent, and perfect circle waiting in the dark. It is our own pattern, our own face, our own story reflected back at us from the abyss. It is our own pattern, our own face, our own story reflected back at us from the abyss. And this reflection is not unique. The Baltic Sea anomaly, while perhaps the most famous of the modern era, is not alone in its ambiguity. It is part of a larger, global family of unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, mysteries that sit at the precise, blurry intersection of geology and archaeology. To truly grasp the Baltic mystery, we must see it as part of this wider, watery context. The oceans of our planet are, as we have noted, the last true frontier. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the floor of our own seas. And in this vast, unexplored darkness, other anomalies are waiting, each with its own story, its own passionate proponents, and its own deep, scientific skepticism. Let us drift, for a moment, across the world to the coast of Japan, to the waters off the island of Yonaguni. Here, in the 1980s, a diver searching for hammerhead sharks stumbled upon something that would rewrite the very definition of possible. He found what appeared to be a monument, a colossal, monolithic underwater structure the size of a pyramid, rising from the seafloor. It is not a circle like our Baltic anomaly. It is a thing of sharp, staggering geometry. It appears to have vast, flat terraces, impossibly straight, 10-meter-high walls, and shapes that look uncannily like steps or columns, or even a carved human face. Geologists who have dived the site are, like their Baltic counterparts, split. The official, mainstream geological explanation is that this is a natural phenomenon, a massive block of sandstone and mudstone, part of a known geological formation, that just happens to break along perfectly straight, horizontal, and vertical lines due to natural jointing and fault lines. It is, they say, a spectacular example of pareidolia, our pattern-seeking brains imposing the idea of architecture onto a natural geometric rock formation. But the other side, including the site's discoverer, Masaaki Kimura, insists that this is impossible. He points to features that geology cannot easily explain. Carved channels, post holes that seem designed to hold pillars, and even a turtle shape that looks deliberately carved. He argues this is a 10,000-year-old, man-made structure, a lost civilization from the end of the last ice age, drowned by the rising seas. It is the exact same debate as the Baltic Anomaly, just with a different shape. It's just rock. No, it's impossible. It must be artificial. And now let us drift again, across the Pacific, to the warm, shallow, turquoise waters of the Bahamas, near the island of North Bimini. Here, in the 1960s, divers found another legend, the Bimini Road. It is a long, linear path of massive, roughly rectangular, flat limestone blocks, fitting together neatly like a giant underwater cobblestone street or the foundation of a massive wall. It stretches for nearly half a mile. To the eye, it screams artificial. It looks, for all the world, like a man-made road. It became, famously, the primary piece of physical evidence for Edgar Cayce's predictions of a lost Atlantis. But here, too, geology has a simple and elegant counter-argument. These stones, while geometric, are a known natural formation called beach rock. As shoreline sediment, sand and shells, gets naturally cemented together by minerals, it forms a hard, flat layer. And as this layer is subjected to the stresses of the sea and the shifting seafloor, it naturally fractures, just like drying mud, into geometric, rectangular, block-like shapes. The Bimini Road, science says, is not a road. It is just a perfectly natural, fractured slab of beach rock. And yet, the debate rages. The stones fit too well. The lines are too straight. The mystery, like at Yonaguni, persists. What do these other great watery mysteries tell us about our own anomaly in the Baltic? They show us that the Baltic anomaly is not an isolated case. It is part of a pattern of the Earth itself. Our planet, it seems, has a strange and playful habit of creating geological formations that look, for all the world, like the work of intelligent hands. Geology, it turns out, is a far more creative and geometric artist than we give it credit for. Can create straight lines, can create right angles. It can, in the form of a mud volcano or a pingo, create a perfect circle. These other sites, Yonaguni and Bimini, provide us with a powerful, rational, natural precedent. They show us that nature is fully capable of creating the impossible shapes that so baffled the Ocean X divers. When we see the Baltic anomaly in this context, the "it's just a rock" theory suddenly becomes far more powerful and far more likely. It becomes the simplest explanation in a world that we know is full of such natural, geometric wonders. It is, perhaps, just the Baltic's version of the Bimini Road. But this context also highlights the one crucial standout difference. Yonaguni does not shut down electronics. The Bimini Road does not have a dead zone that kills satellite phones. This is the one stubborn, inconvenient fact that keeps the Baltic anomaly in a class of its own. It is the one detail that resists the simple geological explanation. It is the active part, the ghost in the machine. The other sites are passive. They are cold, dead stone, impressive to look at, but they do not do anything. The Baltic anomaly, if the reports are to be believed, acts. It interacts. It defends itself almost with a field of interference. And this is why it remains the king of these mysteries. It is the one that winks back at us from the darkness. It is the one that is not just a geological puzzle, but a technological one. And so, while these other sites help us to ground our expectations, to appreciate the artistry of nature, they also, by their very passivity, serve to highlight just how truly strange the Baltic object is. It remains alone, unique, a riddle that is not just about a shape, but about an energy, a circle of stone that has a pulse. And that is a mystery of a different order entirely.